Today, in a brief few moments, I'm going to talk about social selling. And I thought I'd tell you a little bit about how I got into this space to start off with. I didn't kind of wake up one day and say, hey, I see this social media thing is getting kind of cool. I think I'll write a book about it. And that wasn't really how I started. What happened was my background is sales. So I've been doing sales training for 20 years, done it all around the world. And at some point, number one, I started to realize that sales was broken the way I was doing it, at least the way I was training people. That actually, customers were getting smarter and smarter, and no offense, and I consider myself a salesperson, but salespeople were kind of getting dumber and dumber. So the consumer was armed with more information than we were in many cases when they walked in the door of our store, our car lot, our location, our business. And I also realized that people were just tired of being talked at by marketers and sales professionals. And there had to be a different way of doing things, a more engaging way of doing things. And so I started using social selling or social media to actually mark up my own business first. So I started blogging in 2002 and podcasting in 2004. And I did it simply to reach out and really connect with senior decision makers within major corporations. Now what happened though is after a while these guys would hire me to do sales training, but then they'd say, that sales training was great, Shane, but we want you to teach us how you made us find you. So how did that work? We looked up a certain topic, there you were, we went to your website, we found a podcast, we listened to it, we loved it, we connected with you. Teach us how to do that. And so I was kind of dragged a little bit, kicking and screaming, into sort of the social media space by my sales training clients, really. And so from that aspect, then I went off and wrote a book with one of my good friends and also clients, Stephen Jagger, called Sociable in 2009, and Guerrilla Social Media Marketing with J. Conrad Levinson in 2010. And it's kind of been history since then. It's just been really rolling. And so let's talk a little bit, next slide here, about social media. Anybody familiar with Gary Vaynerchuk or Gary V? So we brought Gary along with the Soho Business Group and the National Post to Vancouver in 2012. And at that time, I was working with a social media agency, and I asked Gary, I said, Gary, what do I do about these clients who don't believe in social media? And he said, don't work with them. Now, he has that luxury because he's got, inbound leads coming in every day, and he kind of laughs and says, no, seriously, he says, tell them I told you this. He said, saying you don't believe in social media is like saying you don't believe in the internet. Think about it. If you say you don't believe in social media, you don't believe in the internet. Because social media is now, today, the minutia that ties together every single website and social application, news site, you name it. Social media ties it together. And what we'll notice, even if you read an article, it can be 250 words, but the comments will be 1,100 words. And so social is the real conversation that's happening out there. And so when someone says they don't believe in social media, I think they really don't understand is that social media is now the internet. The internet is now social. Next slide. Another way of saying things is that the customer now owns your brand. So I've done a lot of work with Ford Motor Corporation across Canada, working with all their automotive dealerships and training them in social media and social selling. And I often think about this scenario where the customer owns your brand because I remember driving by a really well-designed billboard for a Ford F-150 in an industrial area in Calgary. And it was obviously targeted at corporate decision makers buying fleets of vehicles. And I thought about how much that message could get reworked. That I could reach into my pocket, driving my economy rental car, and take a picture of that billboard and simply tweet, gas guzzler. And probably you'd reply and say, actually, Shane, that's not true. It's the most efficient vehicle in its class. And you'd hop in and go, I think people should drive to work. Someone else says, actually, you know what, I don't like Ford at all because I had a bad experience. Someone else says, I love my Ford Mustang. And from this whole conversation erupts on Twitter. Then a blogger grabs it, and they go, this is a really cool conversation about the Ford. And they'll take and curate all those tweets, make their own video, and write their own piece. They'll post it and share it off with their network. And kind of the lesson here is that Ford vetted and created this piece of marketing material to live in one place, but it grew legs, and it ran around the internet, and it changed meaning. And the reality is that your customers own your brand. They're the ones that define what your brand is in many cases based upon their conversations. And also, in essence, your employees own your brand as well, is that they are the voice every day when they're out there on social networks communicating with people, even just what their life is about. All of that seeps through and impacts your brand. And so what's really important is I remember sitting down with, anybody know George Moen? He used to be the CEO of Blenz Coffee. Anyone? So George, I sat down with George several years ago, and George sat me down and said, Shane, tell me about this Twitter thing. I said, okay, and actually invited me over for a beer. At that time, it was called Smiley's. It's called something else. And now, at Smiley's Pub, and he sat me down, and we had a beer, and he said, tell me about this Twitter thing. And I started explaining it to him, and he started to kind of attack me. I said, George, like, I don't care if you don't like Twitter. Like, you invited me for a beer. We don't have to talk about Twitter. And he goes, no, but show me, how does it work? And so I went and did a search.twitter.com search at that time, and I searched for Blenz Coffee within 2 kilometers of the pub. And the first tweet was, oh, I love my barista, and here's a picture of my latte. And he's like, oh, that's cool. And the next one was, my barista sucked, this coffee tastes burnt, Starbucks is better, never go to Blenz. And he was like, how the hell do we make these guys shut up? How do we stop them? Can we sue them? Right? Can we sue Twitter? What do we do, Shane? And he was kind of joking, and he knew the answer is, you really can't control the conversation anymore, but you can lead it and get involved in it. And that's really the key aspect. The other thing today, too, is that a lead isn't what a lead used to be. A lead used to be, you sit there and wait for the marketing department to deliver you a list of people with names and phone numbers who are qualified. Today, a lead is you share a great post about your industry on LinkedIn, and someone likes it. That's a social signal. Then you engage that person, start a dialogue, begin to interact, build rapport, and then they enter your sales pipeline. And so it's a very different world here as a sales professionals, that we can't just sit with our hand open expecting for marketing to come by and plop leads in our hand. In fact, we're all marketers and we're all in sales now. Next one. Next slide. Here's an interesting study done by my friend Jim Keenan. And what they did is they followed 500 sales professionals for 3 months last year, and they compared those that, and I've got a link on my blog for all of you guys at closingbigger.net to the full study, but they followed 500 sales professionals, and what they found is that of those sales professionals that use social media, 74% of them exceeded quota. Okay, so 74% exceeded quota. What's interesting is another part of the statistics in the study shared that there was a study done in 2012 where 24% of salespeople who don't use social media missed their quota, and now it is 36%. So it's increased by 50%. And so what it's showing is that social media use as a tool in selling is becoming more and more important. Next slide. So let's talk about some of these platforms. We look at even Facebook. 1.4 billion people on Facebook. By the end of this year, India will be the largest demographic on Facebook, by the way, more than any other country, nationality in the world. But what I think is most powerful about Facebook, which most people only think LinkedIn is great for, is something called, next slide, social proximity. What you'll see here is I was looking for a decision maker at Oracle in Vancouver, and I can search friends of friends who work for Oracle, and Facebook will tell me which of my friends' friends work for Oracle. Then I can reach out and ask for introductions to the appropriate person. And so when we look at that, it works a lot like LinkedIn, but even that, most people aren't using it that way. Next slide. So LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a very powerful tool, of course. It represents every Fortune 500, every major decision maker, period, and most organizations are on LinkedIn. 50% of all university grads in North America have a LinkedIn profile. And yet most of us are still using it like a boring resume. And yet it's a very dynamic networking and publishing platform that can really be your online brand as an individual. Next slide. So Twitter. Twitter is pretty misunderstood in many cases, but actually in that study done by Jim Keenan, what they found is that Twitter bypassed LinkedIn this year in the tool of choice for sales professionals for lead generation, which I thought was really interesting. Because LinkedIn will tell me about your professional life, but Twitter will tell me everything else. Right? It'll really give me an idea of what you're about. So this is an example of just searching for cloud near Vancouver, British Columbia. Now, I could find people talking about clouds, but if I'm in cloud computing, and I'm selling software as a service platforms, then this is a great way for me to find people in the community interested in that and begin to interact with them and engage them. And so there's 400 million updates a day, so if you don't know how to use search and drill down, it's kind of like drinking champagne through a fire hose, right? It's pretty good, but it's just too much. But if you get really good at Twitter search, it's an incredible prospecting tool. Next slide. YouTube. 6 billion hours of video a month are watched on YouTube. That's pretty phenomenal. And what I find interesting is that YouTube, most people think, well, I want to make a viral video, and that's the big goal. But YouTube has got video has so many other applications. I find video is the most like being in person you can be without being in person. I love to connect long distance with customers I've sent pitches to via Google Hangouts or Skype video. But also, I've done it where I put a proposal forward. I've got a board of directors. I'm not allowed to. Anybody have that scenario where you're not allowed to meet the decision makers in sales, right? So you've written the proposal. You can't get in there. And so what I did is I recorded a video of myself to the Ford Motor Dealers Association of British Columbia, to the guys in the board. Just a quick 2-minute video talking about why they should hire me and what I know about their business and how passionate I am about working with them. And when they played that video, literally that was it. I had the deal. And it wasn't the proposal that did the selling, it was the video that closed the deal, and I wasn't there. So we can look at very creative ways of using video as well on a very one-to-one basis. And when we think of social media, we think one-to-many. Oh, I get to tweet to the world and tell them my opinion of the Canucks, or TransLink, which I was doing today, or anything else. But the reality is that the real power is for me to connect with that one individual and begin to build a dialogue. And if you do that with 2 or 3 people a day, that's hundreds of new connections every year that are in your network. Next slide. Selling. So this is how I like to define selling. Selling is about creating an environment where an act of faith can take place. I think this is really important because selling is not about facts. I remember dealing with Infosat Communications, who was a client of mine a number of years ago, and they sold the satellite technology and the uplink for the Kandahar base station for the Canadian military. And when he signed that deal, it was that thick. And he said he doesn't know what's in there, and neither does the military. At the end of the day, there were so many facts and details in that agreement that it was, do you believe that I can deliver? And that's really, now obviously you have to be credible and you have to deliver. You don't want to mess up the military's satellite uplink. There'd be a problem with that. But at the end of the day, it is really about gaining trust and credibility. And so with social media, what Stephen Jagger and I came up with a number of years ago, which is still very, very relevant today, maybe even more so, is we came up with the 9 rules of engagement in social media. And so here's our 9 rules. I've also got a link to that in my blog post with an infographic for you guys as well that you can pull off. But the first rule, number 1, and this is the most important one, and this is the most commonly broken rule by all sales professionals, is stop pitching and start connecting. So when you connect with me on LinkedIn, because I've made a request, you don't know me, but you know some people I know, and you've heard of me, and I connect with you, and you say yes, and then 3 hours later, I send you a discount coupon to my online course. How does that feel? Anybody? Awesome? Do you feel like a genuine personal connection, like you want to refer me to people? Absolutely not. And so, or when someone likes your Facebook page, and all it is me marketing. So there's 8 posts that week, and they're all about what your brand is doing, what you're selling, your staff. There's nothing about how my life or my business can get better. And so it's really, really important that we start connecting, asking great questions, and generating real dialogue with people. Number 2, doers win in the game of social media. This is a big one. I've seen people say, well, that blogging thing didn't work for us. And I go on and look at their corporate blog, and the first week they blogged every day, the second week they blogged once, then a month later they did another blog post, then there was like a Happy New Year's post 6 months later, and they abandoned it. And it wasn't that blogging doesn't work, as they didn't work it. It doesn't mean you have to tweet 65 times a day, but once you start, stay in the game. You know, I look at probably the most, what's the most popular type of television show out there? Reality, right? Right, but which one? Game of Thrones. Okay, Game of Thrones again. Still, it's a series, right? If you didn't know when it was going to be on next, or they were supposed to be on that day and it wasn't, and they delayed it another day, then they came out at midnight that next night, then the next week they decided not to do it, and then they would have no viewers, right? Yet we get on Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn and we think, I'll just post whenever I feel like it. Meanwhile, you're developing a relationship with a group of people who want to see you as a thought leader and an influencer, yet they don't know when you're going to share information. So they go somewhere else where they can depend upon consistent dialogue or consistent brand story. So it's really, really important to stay in the game. Number 3, this one's really hard for me to get over, but it's not about you. Okay? It's not about you. And so when I first started blogging, I was talking about what I was doing and my opinion and this and that, and the only person reading my blog was my mom. Because my mom cares, right? Your mom cares about what you're doing and how awesome your life is and your new haircut or whatever else, right? But the reality is, when I started thinking about where it hurt for senior decision makers, vice presidents of sales, VP of marketing, what their goals were, what their challenges were, and I started blogging about solutions to that, all of a sudden the phone started to ring, the email inbox started to fill up. And so it really isn't about you or your products, it's about, I like what John Ferreira, CEO of Nimble, said. He said, people don't buy products or services, they buy better versions of themselves or their company. And so if we can think about that when we're writing our blog posts or creating our content, that's key. Number 4 is be fearless in your contribution to community. And so give more and engage more than your competitors think is practical or comfortable. So if when your competitors share something about your business, or someone can share something about your competitor's business and your competitor says, thank you, what you need to do is when they share things about their business, about your business, don't just say thank you. Look at their Twitter profile, see they're in Coquitlam, say, hey, thanks a lot. How are things today in Coquitlam? Doesn't seem like a big deal, just that little bit of extra, but it says, I took a minute to get to know you. And you're more than just a tweet, you're actually a person behind that account. There's a person behind that account. And then on the other side is give more than they think is practical. So when I first started blogging, I had some well-meaning, much older dudes who were in the sales training space say to me, Shane, young fella, you know, if you share all that stuff for free, no one's going to hire you. That's what they said. They said, you gotta give them like a 1-minute clip of your audio and make them pay to listen to the other 9 minutes. And anyways, I thought, well, if that's what they believe, I'll do the opposite. So I started giving away more. That's how I got to speak across Chile, Brazil, Colombia. That was scary, actually, that particular trip. It got me to work with Ford Motor Company. Literally a 2-year contract came off an initial podcast, a full 20-minute podcast from rapport building. And I look at all of these things, and it was actually about not being afraid to kind of give more than you think is comfortable. To actually really, really say what would help people. And that's what makes a difference. Number 5, don't be a social spammer. Engage. And what I'm really talking about is that no one follows you just to hear you talk about yourself. They want interaction. They want feedback. When they comment on your post or they ask you a question, they expect a response. Number 6, be authentic because you don't have a choice. And at one point in our life, we could have a level of duplicity where we could be one way in public and one way at work and one way in private. But the reality is, if you don't want a picture of you with a lampshade on your head dancing at the Christmas party on a table, don't put a lampshade on your head. Maybe don't get on the table. And the reality is everybody's afraid of Big Brother, but I'm afraid of you guys. You guys all have one of these. Big Brother's at least a little bit accountable to what they post on the internet about you, but I have no control over what you post. And so whatever we're up to, the reality is it's going to come out on the internet. And the same goes with our brand. If we espouse these certain values within our organization and how great we are and how good we treat our people and the lifestyle that comes involved with and the work-life balance and all that beautiful stuff that companies talk about nowadays, and then the person starts work and their computer's not hooked up, their manager doesn't know how to mentor them, they don't have direction and feedback, you know what? That's going to end up on Glassdoor.com. It's going to end up on all kinds of other websites. The truth gets out. And so it's really important. You don't have to be perfect, but you have to be responsive and real about what your brand's about. So number 7 is be consistent. And that is probably one of the hardest things for most people is the consistency. Is that I'm, Jay Levinson, the late Jay Levinson, good friend of mine, a mentor, one of my favorite quotes from him was that mediocre done consistently will beat brilliant done once every time in marketing. And so it's not about that one brilliant post. It's about staying in the game and being real and communicating and staying connected. Number 8 is amplify through community. So whether you're a marketer or you're a sales professional, you need other people. You want other people talking about your brand. It's not about you tweeting 24 hours a day. It's about creating an experience where people share stories where they talk about you. And so I can't necessarily reach 1 million people, but I can go out and find 20 people with 50,000 Twitter followers and treat them like royalty and have them share my brand message. Number 9, and this is really important, is get sociable. And when we wrote the book Sociable, what we were talking about, sociable is about using the internet to get off the internet. Social media is not a video game. I don't care how many LinkedIn connections you have or how many new LinkedIn connections you made or how many people you added to the CRM this week. How many people did you talk to on the phone? How many people did you meet in person? How many people walked through your door for an appointment? That's the real measurement. And so your goal, the quickest path to return on investment in social media is to use the internet to get off the internet, to book those appointments, to invite people in, to find a reason to connect with them. Next slide. So anybody recognize this guy? I see him a lot on LinkedIn and Twitter. I see them a lot when I Google and look for sales professionals that my clients are hiring. And this is what I see. And people don't have their social media profiles filled out. They're an egg on Twitter, or they got like this dark photo on LinkedIn from like 40 feet away. You're not quite sure. And then they wonder why people don't want to connect with them. And it's kind of like going to a networking function with a paper bag on your head and wondering why nobody wants to meet you. And so it's really important is that your social media activity, your social graph online is truly your business card today. And people make really quick decisions on whether or not going to do business with you when they Google you. So next slide. So this is my friend Steve Barish, who doesn't know that he's on this slide today, but this is fun. So he'll find out when I send him the link. But I just Googled Steve, and I thought it was pretty amazing. That big photo didn't come up. I put that in there. But this is a Google search down the side. Steve's been active in social media for quite some time. He owns a company called OnRes, which has reservation software for like bed and breakfasts and independent motels, hotels, small businesses. And I Googled Steve, and every one of these links were consciously created by him in the way that he's been active on LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, as well as Instagram, and also writing reviews on other websites. And what's happened is Steve has really consciously curated his online footprint. So when you're looking for him, this is what you get. And so when I search you or I search your company, have you consciously curated your online footprint so that when I make that split decision, whether you're credible or you're someone I want to do business with or call back, that the answer is yes. Next step. Social media success is about listening. And this is the other one. I've talked a lot about posting and tweeting, interacting, but it's really about listening. These massive conversations are going on. There are 400 million updates a day on Twitter alone. And so it's really about getting good at listening for the right thing and then acting upon it. Now, in most cases, when I deal with marketing teams initially, and they invest in these fancy dashboards, the reason why they do it is they get this. Next slide. Scorekeeping. So they get how many tweets and likes and interactions and comments and form fill-outs and all these things are filled out, and it's a scoreboard. And it's kind of a tired analogy, but you can't win the game by looking at the scoreboard, right? You got to be out there and acting. I think in too many cases, we get all of these reports done from Hootsuite and all kinds of other tools, and I run down to my boss, and I give you my report, and you go, oh, that's awesome, it's improved, and you give me a gold star, and I go back and I put it on my cubicle, and that's often what these reports are used for. But social media monitoring shouldn't be used for that. Here's what social media monitoring should be used for. Next slide. Stakeholder spotting. So this is a flare going off in the mountains. This is a signal. So when you see the flare go off, you don't go, oh, there's a flare. Let's mark that down. You say, oh, there's a flare. Let's go over and connect with them. And so social media monitoring tools like Twitter search or some of the more comprehensive, expensive tools that you can use to dig down and find people and interaction conversations aren't just about getting business intelligence, it's about acting upon it. It's about in the moment connecting with people where they're having an emotional experience with your brand or your industry. Next slide. So here's a quick example, something I did around social media monitoring a couple of years back now. But for literally a couple months, each day I'd go in and search for guerrilla marketing near New York, because my book around guerrilla social media marketing had come out a couple of years before, but I hadn't been in New York yet and talked about it. And so I just started following people who were talking about guerrilla marketing in the Manhattan area. And now, New Yorkers are like, why is this guy following me, right? Not the easiest group to break into. But over a period of time, I started gaining rapport with a few of them. And I had this vision that I had to have like a book signing with 40 people there. But I was able, through just conversation, when I got off the plane a day later before my conference, sit down and have dinner with a dozen people I'd never met before, who I only connected with on Twitter, several of which I'm still doing business with. And all that was about was being curious and using tools like social search to connect and begin to build connections. Next slide. I also use a tool called TweetReach. And TweetReach is, I could search, for instance, mentions of just Microsoft Canada. Let's say they're your competitor or one of your competitor's Twitter handles. And it'll tell me all the major mentions and the influence that brand has that week. But then next slide. It also shares with me a complete list, right down to 50 of them, of the major contributors of that brand, where I can then individually profile and reach out to those individuals. So I actually see everyone who contributes to my competitor's brand online, and then begin to engage them and begin to move them over on my side. Next step. So one of the things I'd like to share with you is the thought that you really need a social CRM. So social CRM is much like a regular contact management tool, but really what happens is the data doesn't get as stale. So often in many cases, you'll enter your data and your contact management, and if you don't go in there for 6 weeks, it's that old, it's 6 weeks old. Yet a good social CRM will actually connect with all your social media profiles and then follow the connections that you have and then curate their activities into one nice little profile where all of a sudden I've seen everything Tim has done in the last week when I click on his profile in Nimble. And I'll share you how that works. So basically what a social CRM does, is it does what a traditional CRM does, where you're making calls, you're connecting with people, and you're recording the information. But then, many of us, who lives in your inbox? So you're off emailing on Outlook or Gmail. We live in there, right? So we're emailing away, and then we're off on Twitter, and then we're off on Facebook, and then we're on LinkedIn, and then we have to remember when we contacted them and what message and what day, and it's kind of a mess. And so what social CRM does is it actually pulls that all in together. So you've got a dashboard here that, for me, literally pulls in all the major interactions I've had, but if I clicked on any of these contacts, it will actually give me the regular information, but it'll give me the latest photos pasted to Instagram, Facebook, latest tweets, interactions, plus, of course, where they are in the sales funnel and what I need to do for the next step. Next slide. Nimble, there's also one called Kite Desk, which works well with Salesforce. Nimble has this great tool, a Chrome plugin. It's called Nimble Anywhere. And literally what you do is you just, as soon as I, for instance, hit the BCTIA website, up on the side, it'll pull up all their social media information and all their background information. They can pull out of multiple networks and put it in all one spot. And all I have to do is click Add to Nimble, and it adds it to my CRM. Or, next slide, I could hover over Kirsten Sutton, who's actually with SAP Labs and the board of directors. If I wanted to meet her, I just highlight her name, and it finds all of her information within all the major social networks, curates them. I do a little correcting. I hit Add to Nimble, and now I've got an opportunity. Do I want to connect with her first on Twitter? Do I want to reach out via Google+? Do I want to ask for a mutual introduction through LinkedIn? But it's a very cool tool in the fact that your database is now living through social updates. Next slide. You can even, of course, do it off of Twitter. So again, I've highlighted that woman's name, Babette, and what's popped up is all her core information, and I can add her to my database, my CRM, and connect with her. And so it's an incredible prospecting tool, because literally just by highlighting someone, it'll pull out all their social data and create a live, living profile that's up to date that moment for you. So I don't work for Nimble. I don't have any benefit for you to use it, but it's about $15 a month. And so if you're really serious about social selling, for me, it saved me a ton of time and energy and kept me really organized. So wrapping up here, social communication success. Number one, focus on your A category prospects. And what I'm really talking about is those 20%ers that give you 80% of your business. You're going to have multiple niches, but you'll know who those are in each niche. And it's really important to truly understand who those people are, because social media is so massive. Those networks are so large that if you really don't know your target market, you can spend a lot of time talking to the wrong people. So I think the real key is it's not activity, but focus activity with the right markets. The next step is pick the right platforms. So what are the right platforms? There's two thoughts, but here's my thought. Number one is the platforms your customers are using today. But also, why was Wayne Gretzky so successful? What did he say? What did Gretzky say? He always knew where the puck was going. Thank you. And so he didn't go where the puck was and chase it with the rest of the guys. He would know where it was going based upon the movement of the group. And so this is why, even if you don't think that your customers are going to ever be on Pinterest or ever use Instagram, it's really important that you understand those platforms and you invest in them enough that when your customers move there, you're not playing catch up or chasing your competitors. Number three, follow the rules of engagement. And I know I went through them pretty quick, but there's a pretty in-depth post I've linked to for you from closingbigger.net. Number four, use a social CRM like Nimble or Salesforce with Kite Desk to organize it so that it goes from just socializing randomly through all these clouds, so to speak, and actually pulling it down in an organized fashion. And lastly is follow up, follow up, follow up. I closed a deal yesterday, a small consulting deal. But what was interesting is that I've been talking to this guy via LinkedIn and liking his updates and interacting and asking him questions for probably 2 years. Now that sounds like that's a waste of time. Well, no, actually, I really appreciate that business this month. And in 2 years from now, I'm going to appreciate the business from the other guy I just started talking to this month. And so what's really important is that to stay connected, to stay active, to keep the conversation going, and that the more conversational you are and the more focused you are on really offering the right content, stuff that really resonates with your audience, I think you're going to find more and more people are going to be putting their hand up and wanting to do business with you. But it really, if you don't follow up, if it's that one tweet or that one LinkedIn message and you never follow up again, you might as well not do it. Because it's really about the beginning of a conversation, not a tool for closing. So wrapping up here, closingbigger.net is where you can find all these notes, plus the infographic on the rules of engagement and the list to that study. You can follow me on Twitter. That's actually the quickest way to get a hold of me, believe it or not. Love to connect you on LinkedIn as well. But lastly, I'll leave you with this thought, and I kind of started with this, is that people close deals. Social media doesn't close deals. And social media is a tool that will leverage your own personality, your own work ethic, your own intelligence, your own thought leadership, and that's what it's about. It's still about you using the internet to get real, to use the internet to get off the internet and connect with people and build real relationships. And that's what's really going to make a difference in driving your sales. Thank you very much.